Okay, we are here again with Madelyn Hoffman, the candidate for governorship of New Jersey in the Green Party. Our last conversation was a little rushed at the end there, so we're covering some of the topics that we missed and some of the topics that maybe were a little rushed. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up again, we'll start with the defund the police. To make my position clear, I'm not totally in support of defund the police. I believe it police need to be restructured. The union needs to be altered. I think that cops that kill people should go to jail and not, just get another job somewhere else. I just don't think that the solution to that is defunding. I believe it's training. You believe in defunding, but there is a lot of different meanings to that word, defund.
Yes.
So
Yes.
why don't you tell me what your idea of defunding is, and if you were governor, what kind of policies you would push for?
All right. Yeah. Good summary of that, Daniel. Um, I know that defunding the police, those words are kind of hit people in different ways. They react to it in different ways. And the reason I know that is that I was one of those people who initially heard the expression defund the police and said, no, that can't work. But then I also, there was a lot of discussion when the term Black Lives Matter came out and was first introduced. And over time, a lot of people have come to understand what that means and what it doesn't mean. For me, defunding the police, well, let's see, when people started to say, you can't say that, you can't say that, I thought, well, I'm not the one who's on the front line being attacked by, brutalized by, harmed by the police. So I'm not the person who's going to influence the language. I shouldn't, the language comes from those people and those communities directly affected. And then I started to listen what defund the police meant to the people using it. And here's a similarity. I've been fighting against a bloated military budget for years.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, our military budget is $740 billion with a B. That's baseline. Then there are other things that are added into it. When I say cut the military budget, cut it by half, cut it by 75%. I'm not talking about eliminating it entirely. I'm talking about cutting it and cutting it drastically and getting rid of and using the money, the billions that are cut, redirecting that money into things that will actually make our community safer. We could have an unlimited number of tanks and nuclear weapons. But is that providing us with security? In my estimation, no. What provides us with security are people who have an education, who've had a chance to have an education, people who, places to play, recreational facilities, the whole 9 yards. So when I say defund the police, I'm looking at, we started to talk about this one specifically, City of Newark, and the largest
Right.
budget item in the City of Newark is for the police. And yes, I remember and heard you say that, during the last year, there were no shootings by police, but that changed as soon as the new year came in, as soon as 2021 came in. And
And if I may, that also
yes,
something similar happened in Camden, where I'm sure you've heard the story. A police chief took over, and basically he released everybody and removed the union, and then allowed all those officers to, because Camden was one of the highest crime rates in the country
yes.
for so long, and then allowed all those officers to reapply. And he
Hmm.
accepted most of them. There were some that had a history of violence or racism that he did not allow, and then restructured the way that they do policing, which included more, feet on the ground walking through the neighborhood, more communication, less arrest quotas and ticket quotas, and more just talking with the people. And the crime rate plummeted by 42%. Now that ended up being higher budget than previously, but we saw positive results from that, for both the police and the people. But then once that police chief stepped down, I believe in
Mm,
2019, things changed again. The union was reinstituted,
mm,
and those police officers who were changed to members of the county office, like workers for the county, were brought back into the union as police officers, and we've noticed a shift. So, I mean, like this military thing, I think that's really the biggest issue because it, to go back to Black Lives Matter, Black people are obviously disproportionately
yes.
affected by police abuse. But even if you just look at the numbers of killings on white people or light skinned Hispanics, it is still much higher than any other country in the world. You know, it isn't, this isn't an
We're
American issue.
we're
And
a
military
violent
issue.
country. We're a violent country, even though we claim not to be.
Yeah.
I think we mentioned last time that, the United States has been at war in one way, shape, or form for all but about 23 to 25 years of its existence, whether that was genocide against Native Americans, whether that was a revolutionary war, a civil war, war against, the Spanish American War. We can go on and on. There has never been a peace president in the United States. But going back then to the police and the issue there, I I just think that if we took money out of the police, I mean, it sounds, I wasn't fully aware of what was going on in Camden, and it sounds like what was being done was microcosm of some of the things that I support, which
Mm-hmm.
is not necessarily all housed within the police department, but taking the money that's been allocated for the police department, putting it into social work, putting it into public schools, putting it into infrastructure. And I mean, if we talked for a longer period of time about that man who, Rashard Brooks, who was sleeping on the drive-through line at Wendy's,
Right.
you know, if that was peaceful. That
Right.
was a peaceful interaction for 45 minutes. How did it escalate?
He
And
was
why
not
did it?
dangerous at all.
No, he wasn't.
Yeah.
He wasn't. And that's the thing. I mean, you get people, when you start looking at, you know, driving with a broken tail light, having air fresheners hanging from your rear view mirror, the things that Black people are stopped for and then killed over. There's something wrong with the system that enables that. And then, yes, um, Derek Chauvin was convicted, but he's appealing. Let's see where that goes. Let's see what the sentencing is. But that's one, and it's one
Yep.
out of how many. And we had a 9-minute video that went viral, that enabled so many people to see what happened. And the crowds and people from the community came in to try to intervene in that situation. So for me, it's a systemic issue as much as it is simply a police issue. And it's not about abolishing the police entirely, although I was thinking about this all weekend. Some people who support my candidacy would say, yes, it is. It is about abolishing the police entirely. And I was thinking, well, I guess, I fall a little bit short in that one. But I do think that as a society, we need to take we take a different kind of look at how we keep the peace.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could eliminate poverty, if we could eliminate income inequality, if we could um, provide health care, if we could do so that people aren't making the kinds of choices we spoke about last time, if we could do those things and address the systemic inequalities first, then defunding the police is not going to be so scary a proposition to some. And lastly, we spoke about this briefly too, but do you remember those images from Ferguson, Missouri, with a woman standing in front of the tank? There was a tank going down the street, and a Black woman stood in front.
Yep.
You know, in front of it. Well, that's the other side of defunding the police. That is demilitarizing the police. And there's a program, the S-1033 program, that takes cast off military gear, military weapons that were in Iraq, Afghanistan, elsewhere, and are no longer needed, and basically gives them away to county police forces and sometimes city police forces. And I stand totally opposed to that, because you don't want to
Right.
see the image of that tank being used against our own people. So
Right. I think
it's
so,
two pronged. Yeah.
so I think we have the same end goal, just different ideas of how to get there. Like cops shouldn't have tanks. We talked a little bit before about how in my town the cop cars are blacked out with tinted
Oh yeah.
windows and black vinyl. Every single car is an undercover car. And I compare that. I spent some time living in Europe. The cops there have big, bright blue and yellow cars, so that if you see them, you can wave them down very easily if you need them. It's this huge difference in the mentality of here, and it's no individual cop's fault. This is the system. This is the system that they get brought up into. Everybody joins the police force with the idea of helping their community. Once they get in
Right.
there,
Right.
what that means maybe becomes a little skewed, but this idea that cops need to, it's just so authoritarian in our country, and I think it needs to be restructured to
Yes.
be more helpful and more of that kind of feet on the ground, talking to the community, being there to help. And also, I mean, I've heard the social worker argument of we should be giving a lot of these things that we call police for to social workers. And I just know, I think we should give money to social workers anyway, because social workers in general
Hmm.
make between 30,000 and 50,000 a year, even at high levels, which is ridiculously low. And my argument against replacing police officers with social workers is that a lot of the things that cops, particularly in small towns or rural areas, get called for are domestic abuse
No,
charges.
but they also look at the spate of situations where somebody having a mental health crisis
Yeah,
calls the police for help, and before you know it, the person with the mental health crisis is dead on the ground.
right.
I mean, that's not a new thing. It's been happening for a while, but lately it seems to be happening more and more. And so, yeah, I mean, there are domestic abuse situations like you're talking about, but there are also situations where parents, families, friends don't know how to handle a mental health episode, and the first thought they have is to call the police.
Right.
And I mean, I saw a video of a guy starting to run across the street. It was a mental health episode. He started to run across the street. Before he got even into the middle of the street, he was shot and he was killed.
Right. And that's
So
ridiculous.
yeah, so there are those situations too where social workers are could be much more useful than a person with a gun. I think that's the part, that I was trying to get at the other day as
Hmm.
well. That if that's the only tool you have in your toolbox, everything is going to look like something you have to shoot at. Um,
Exactly. So then what I think is either social workers should be attached to police departments, or police officers should have training in police officers don't get very much training in anything except for shooting their gun. They should be trained in social work, in de-escalation, in all of those things. If they're going to be the ones to get called, then they need to have that skill set, or have an attached social worker who is skilled in that.
yeah,
I think, or
I
something. It's a difficult problem, of course, but we both agree the solution isn't shooting people, right? I
no,
think
and
most cops would agree with that.
yeah, and I would opt for the social worker standalone,
Hmm.
because people who are social workers train and train and train. And I know in Jersey City, for example, there was de-escalation money given to Jersey City for the police department for the express purpose of trying to calm some of these situations down. And it didn't work. I
Mm,
mean, maybe this is generational. Maybe it has to, if you've been on the police force for X amount of time, it's hard to retrain and rethink and recondition. But there are systemic problems that you mentioned as well that need to be addressed.
A lot of it falls on the chief of police or the leaders of the police stations in each region too. It's such a fractured problem that what works in Camden maybe wouldn't work in the Bronx. It's
But
based on each community. It's difficult.
and there are years and years of distrust of the police
Yes.
that come about from the slavery days, excuse me, where police were designed to go after, those who were enslaved, who are running free.
Hmm.
Um, it has a long, deep history of the way that the police forces are used, and so there needs to be at least an overhaul. I think you and I disagree as to how much of an overhaul is needed.
Yeah. But the end
It's
goal, like, we don't need grenade launchers, tanks. We don't need people
no,
getting shot in the street. I
no,
think we agree on pretty much everything as far as the end result goes.
yes,
And I would also argue that I think cops should only work in places where they live.
that's
Um,
yeah,
I know that's like a lot of people don't think of it that way, but if you live in a community and you're a cop there, people know who you are and you know who those people are, and that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be protecting and serving your community, the people that you care about, the people that you love, and they're
and
supposed to be able to trust you.
yeah, and the lack of trust is widening. It's not narrowing, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why these kinds of measures, why I advocate for the measures that I'm speaking out about. Um, but it's a long, long, long history. There's a long history, and it's going to be a long period of time to get where we need to go. But we can't do it by just throwing more money at it. Um, that's my bottom line.
Right. And then you talked about decriminalizing all drugs. Before we get into that, uh, this ties into the police because we recently in New Jersey
Oh
decriminalized
yes.
pot, which is great. Originally, when that bill was originally written, the tax revenue from all marijuana sales was supposed to go to, I believe, public schools and
Mhm.
roads, I think. And last minute, literally the day or two before we voted, they changed it so that the tax revenue would go directly towards police departments. Um, and police departments are the ones that have been putting people in jail for buying and selling pot, and those people are still in jail. Meanwhile, I can step out of my front yard and smoke a joint right now if I want to, and no one can say anything. So, what are your thoughts on all of
Well,
that? The fact that we still have people in prison for this plant, and the
yes.
fact that the tax revenue is going to the cops that put them there.
Wrong, 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 and wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
the idea behind decriminalizing, drugs is to get some of the profit motive out of it. Um, I mean, if we look around the world and we look at efforts in Afghanistan, for example, or even Colombia, look in Latin America, a lot of times the wars follow the drugs, and the drugs follow the wars. I'm not sure which one came first. Um, and um, if it's decriminalized, then there is that profit motive is out of it. And I mean, we have seen, I think we've seen nothing but positives with medical marijuana, with the use of, marijuana for medicinal purposes. And I think, you know, um, we wanted, it's weird because since Murphy was elected on the campaign promise of legalizing marijuana, um, but dragged his feet and dragged his feet and dragged his feet, and it's still not really where it needs to be. People were punished, were picked up, were put behind bars for having something that was supposed to have been legalized months ago, a couple of years ago, for almost 4 years ago now, and their records aren't being expunged, which is part of, again, this whole um, situation of using law enforcement to deepen social divides, to reinforce racism, reinforce the prison, the school to prison pipelines
Mm-hmm.
that we talk about a lot. To get people locked up, and with a criminal record that they can't ever expunge. So all of that, these were the intentions, some of the intentions behind legalizing marijuana, and none of that's taken place. And then the other side of it, and our campaign with Heather Warburton, my lieutenant governor, is very strong on the whole issue of cannabis and the legalization of cannabis. And so sometime, most likely in July, we're going to have a live stream that focuses specifically on this issue. Because the other side of it is, and you might laugh, but or chuckle a little bit, it's happening in Colombia as well, where Canadian companies are coming in to make a profit off the growth and distribution of cannabis grown in Colombia, as opposed to allowing the local people to use it sustainably, to perhaps sell it, or but keep the revenue, keep the money in inside the country, or in this case in New Jersey, allowing people to do things on their own without having massive corporations coming in to take the profits away. And I think it's some of the same Canadian companies, if you will. So this is the bill that we have at present is a mess, because it doesn't do what needs to be done. But my lieutenant governor is a lot more informed about this than I.
Great.
So
Where did you find her?
she's a Green.
Mm-hmm.
She's from South Jersey, Atlantic County. She has her own production company now called Create Your Own Future Productions. She's been very active in local politics in South Jersey, and I was delighted that she agreed to be my running mate. She supports public banking. She's really concerned about the climate crisis,
Mm-hmm.
and not only for those communities along the shoreline, but the flooding is inching its way into the middle of the state, not only at the along the shoreline. And her work on cannabis, LGBTQIA plus, standing up for equal rights for everyone. It's a really good match, and not only geographically, but along the issues as well.
That's great. It's good that you have a good running mate.
Yes.
What about we'll go back to the decriminalization issue. Well, actually, I want to jump to the ICE issue. We
Okay.
talked a little bit about this. I don't think we really got into any detail about it.
No.
ICE is a pretty big deal in New Jersey. We are home to a lot of immigrants: Portuguese, Colombian, Mexican, Chinese,
Vietnamese.
Yeah.
People from the Middle East.
Yes, we're a very big community of immigrants and first
Syrian.
generations.
Mm-hmm.
So, your idea to restrict ICE, what does that entail?
Well, it means to abolish it. It means that been to, I don't know how many car caravans during the height of the pandemic, car caravans around detention centers in Essex County and Bergen County and Hudson County. And then also protests in front of the ICE detention centers or the county jails where ICE detainees are also held. And in most cases, especially during the pandemic, people who were held there were not held there for criminal charges. Their only crime their only crime, if you will, was a border issue one. And during the height of the pandemic, they were in close quarters without without the necessary personal protective equipment, without the ability to be 6 feet apart, with not even aware in some cases if people they were sharing a cell with had COVID or not. I specifically went with a friend from Colombia. We went to interview one person who was held in the Bergen County jail, and he didn't know from day to day if he had been sharing a cell with someone with COVID, because people were that they were being transferred right and left without warning, and it just didn't seem to be respectful of the rights of anyone inside, especially since their whatever immigration violation they had committed should not be a death sentence, should not be one where they were exposed to coronavirus and with the possibility of dying from it. And there have been multiple deaths in under ICE detention. How many were due to coronavirus? I can't be sure. And then there were multiple hunger strikes that took place over the last, I guess, since January primarily, and December before that, because people were being held in conditions that were inhumane. And so I've been a part of the Abolish ICE movement for quite some time. Once again, we're talking about a situation where, okay, you can believe in no borders, which I do. I believe in no borders. I believe that no human, how can you be illegal? And the mantra of the Abolish ICE group is, hey, part of like half of the United States was once Mexican, and the United States took it. So we're arguing over who owns the land, when you really want to get into Latin politics of the Americas. We're all one America. We should be. And
here's an interesting thing. About 2/3 of our immigrants actually come from Asia, but almost all of the detainees in ICE are of Latin descent. And I don't think all Asians are coming here legally. That's not.
No.
So what is going on there? Is there some sort of racial discrimination, or is this something strictly political? Is it what is that big difference?
It's a good question, and I would venture to say a lot of it occurs as a result of U.S. intervention in the politics of these countries. So, for example, there are Syrian refugees coming here, and we all know what's going on in Syria, and we know, maybe not all know, that the United States is deeply involved in some of that intervention and paying people from other countries to be part of it. So I remember giving a speech at the Newton Green in Republican Sussex County, saying, hey, we can't have it both ways. We want to add to or foment the fighting in Syria. And then when people in Syria don't want to live there anymore, can't live there anymore because it's too dangerous and their cities have been bombed out, we want to slam the door on their faces when they come here. We can make similar arguments for Hondurans, Nicaraguans, El Salvadorians, Colombians, Venezuelans, Mexicans,
Brazilians, almost all of South America we have had our hand in.
Yes, I mean, I remember I was the director of a nonprofit peace organization from all of the 2000s, from 2000 to 2018. And we had a Colombian come to speak to us. He had a a news program on WBAI radio out of New York, and there was a controversy then about people coming across the border from Latin America, and people asked him about it, and he said this. He said, when it becomes illegal for the big box stores and the big chemical companies to cross the border from north to south and take away jobs and start, disrupting local lives, when that becomes illegal, I'll talk about how it should be illegal for people to cross back the other way.
Right.
And that to me was a very compelling argument.
And we can also use Venezuela as a very good example because I spent some time in Colombia a few years ago, and there was a lot of Venezuelan immigrants there who were homeless. They got chased out of their homes, and we had a bunch of Venezuelans trying to get into America recently. They were referred to as hordes and caravans and all this, but a lot of people don't realize that we turned Venezuela into the place that it is today. We are putting sanctions on them and not allowing them to import food. We are also putting sanctions on them and not allowing them to export their oil, which is one of the biggest ways that their economy runs. So we are playing a very active role. You could argue it's a crime against humanity because we have just driven down their GDP and their economy so far in only 5 or 6 years. It started under Obama, continued under Trump, and continues under Biden.
Yes.
That people don't have a place to live anymore. They don't have money coming in. They have to leave because of what we did to them, and then we don't let them in here. It's a strange situation, and I mean we can draw some parallels to what's going on in Palestine right now, which I know you have been to a few rallies lately. There's a lot of misinformation, and has been for decades, about what is going on in Palestine. But it's a similar situation where a certain group of people in Israel, right? Not all of Israel, not all Israelis, but a certain group with power in Israel is chasing Palestinians out of their home, and then almost surprised when the Palestinians are impoverished and they want to rebel against this authoritarian regime that is pushing them out and forcing them into open air prisons and poverty. And it just seems like there are a few countries, us being one of them, and several European countries also playing a role, where we chase people away, we ruin their lives, and then when they look for a better life, we
no can't come here, you're not welcome here. But no, Venezuela, the effort by the US to smother it, if you will, or strangle it economically, began as soon as Hugo Chavez won the presidency the first time. So that's 2002. There was that failed coup. It was remember, one day coup in Venezuela, next day, oops. No, the people pushed back. No, that's not correct. There was no coup. Well, the United States has been attempting to unseat either Hugo Chavez or now Nicolas Maduro since 2002. And I saw today that Juan Guaido, our chosen
yes, the leader of Venezuela, as we say it,
who has absolutely no, well, I shouldn't say absolutely no, but he's got a very minuscule base, political base in Venezuela. He's been empowered to do what he can do to unseat Maduro. I mean, to me, as somebody who's been watching U.S. imperialism for too long, this was the most blatant example in my experience. Instead of CIA undercover or covert, we just all plucked somebody out of midair and said, "You're now the leader." Unfortunately, a lot of people's lives are affected by what seems to be, an absolute absurd way of conducting international affairs. A lot of people are affected. I was in Venezuela in 2019, prior to the pandemic. Was only there for 4 or 5 days, but we talked to people who gave us quite the history of the U.S. sanctions that you mentioned. But at the same time, people of Venezuela know exactly who's doing that, what the United States is doing. It's not like the US is doing this and nobody knows. Um, and that the people that I met then, that was a couple of years ago now, prior to the pandemic and the worsening of conditions during the pandemic, the Venezuelans were determined then and they are determined now to stand up to US imperialism. They have an army that's never been used. Well, it was used once back in the time of the Bolivarian Revolution, but it hasn't been used since. They don't want it to be used. They're not a violent people.
Hmm.
But this just keeps going. The United States doesn't take no for an answer. When the United States wants to unseat someone who was elected by the people. So I think a lot of this, this attention to the border issue, I don't think there's as much attention to the border issue in Canada. I don't think there's as much attention to the border issue if people come into New Jersey or New York. I think the place where there's all that attention is on the border between North and Central America. And I think that's for reasons that you were talking about earlier. If you go back through history, the US attempts, well, first the Spanish, then US Canadian attempts to exploit the resources of Latin America for its own ends.
And continue. I mean, just recently we had a coup in Bolivia to get lithium.
Yes.
If it's not oil, it's gold. If it's not gold, it's lithium. It's always something, or just power in the region. I can't even count the amount of times we have overthrown someone in South America who was democratically elected and
Right.
replaced them with someone who was better for our interests. And we've done it. We've done it in the Middle East a million times.
Yes, in Iran, for example, exactly.
Right.
And
We
continue
get
to,
allies and we
yes,
train these people, and then once those people get power, we label them as terrorists, and then we train a new group of people, and when that new group of people gets power, then we label them as terrorists also, and we train a new group of people. It's just a never-ending cycle. It's been going on for at least 60 years at least.
yes. And, I used to talk about international relations as something similar to building friendships, and you say, okay, if I had friends the way that the US has friends, and then the US abandons those friends, if those friends don't serve their interests anymore, I'd have no friends left at all in my life. How can you treat people that way? It's not about building relationships. It's about following the money. It's about the Project for a New American Century, which was developed just before the year 2000, where people like Jeb Abrams and Donald Rumsfeld and I'm forgetting, Jeb Bush, and a
Mm.
whole group of people came up with a plan saying that the United States needs to develop its military, needs to continue to develop its military, and be prepared to stand up against any country anywhere that chooses to threaten our economic interests. And this has been played out over and over again. And I'm just as an aside, hopefully things in Colombia will quiet down some. I mean, the human rights violations now are
Mhm.
off the charts. And, a friend of mine was sending me videos to watch last night and this morning. They were up and then taken down immediately. There's censorship going on. So some of the things that are being done to people, to indigenous, you mentioned Bolivia. I mean, that coup was against Evo Morales and what he had done for the indigenous. And we're trying to protect the land, protect the resources. But I was supposed to leave tomorrow, 5 o'clock in the morning. I was supposed to leave tomorrow for Colombia for a research project that was going to focus specifically on the way that multinational interests are preventing people in Colombia from growing and selling organic coffees, locally based products in the Amazon, you name it, because there needs to be another model. There needs to be another kind of truly sustainable economy, not the kind that comes in with the long arm of imperialism and says, oh, I'm sorry, this is for me. This might be your land, but this is for me.
Right. And, I think having a global economy isn't always bad, but the
No.
fact that our corporations who have no ethical backing whatsoever, they are the ones that control a lot of the global economy. And if they are harming the environment or the people of a faraway country, they don't really care. Whereas if you look at countries whose GDP is more isolated, where their food comes from, like I'll use Portugal as an example. Most of the food in Portugal either comes from Portugal or the next door neighbor, Spain. Um, all the meat that you buy in the market is generally butchered and killed in that town or in that state,
Mm-hmm.
and everything is much more locally grown. They're not a wealthy country by any means, but their economy isn't so caught up with a few billionaires making a bunch of money. Their economy is, well, how can we get what we want and also like keep our country beautiful, keep our people happy, keep things running relatively smoothly. And if your business goes far away to places where you don't care what the effects of your lack of ethics do to people or does to the environment, that's when we see 1/3 of the Amazon getting burned down to the ground, or Colombians not
Yes.
making a profit off of their own resources.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. And there's a book. I don't know if you've read it or heard of it. You probably have. Um, Eduardo Galeano's book, Open Veins of Latin America.
No, I
No?
haven't read that.
Okay, so Hugo Chavez came to the United States when Obama was president, I think, or maybe not. Maybe it was Bush. I don't remember it specifically, but he brought a gift, and the gift he brought was the book, Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. And I've read the beginning several times. Basically, it said, if not for the deliberate, systematic removal of resources from Latin America, the people in Latin America would be wealthy. Now, we're not saying, billionaires. We're saying had enough food, have a beautiful, have a healthy environment, a sustainable environment, because there's enough right there. Um, just as you're describing with Portugal and Spain, there's enough right there to sustain people. But it was when you start looking at this as an extraction industry and you take the money and the responsibility and accountability for that, take that out of the country. That's when you run into these major problems. And I still believe this. I don't know what you think, but I believe most people leave their country to come to another country as refugees or immigrants, not because they want to, but because they can't survive where they are. They
Mhm.
feel that they feel pressure to leave, and because the living conditions where they aren't conducive to raising their families. There's either violence or drug trafficking or bombs or all manner of things that makes it difficult for them to survive. And this is where a truly sustainable, locally based economy. That's one of the things the Greens stand for, also.
So this is a bit anecdotal, but I can attest to that for sure. My parents are both from Portugal, and they came over with my grandmother in one case, but they were all born there. But at the time in the 60s, Portugal was still considered an empire, and it was ran by a dictator, a totalitarian figure, really more than a dictator.
Mhm.
And he still had control over a couple of countries in Africa and a couple of provinces in China and India. that was left over from like the 1500s.
Oh,
And all of Portugal's money was spent on trying to maintain this global economy between Africa and Asia and Portugal itself. And then when that dictator got overthrown, the whole country was kind of thrown into chaos.
mm,
Because up until then, they had been using food rations, and everybody made the same amount of money and all this. Um, and immediately after the country was thrown into chaos, the economy was terrible. You could only get to fourth grade. After fourth grade, you were considered educated. And my parents left there because their parents were afraid of what was going to happen because there was a lot of political turmoil, and B, there was just no money to be had. Now it's 50 years later, just about 50 years later, things are much better.
mm,
Portugal people there are doing great. We talked about that local economy.
right.
Still has a close relationship with the African nations of Angola and Mozambique, which were previously part of the empire. Lots of open immigration, open trading, and all that. But the reason that I'm here, the reason I was born here, the reason my parents came here was out of fear of what could happen in that tumultuous time. And I think that's the same for most immigrants.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You don't pick up your roots and your family, and you know, part company with things that you've known all your life if things are working out there for you.
Yeah.
And some people know where the hand is that's mixing the pot, and some people don't, aren't aware of that, but they still know that conditions are not right. And right now in Latin America, we talked about Venezuela and the U.S. efforts to strangle. Those were the words that public officials in Venezuela used: strangle or smother them economically. But
Hmm.
the support for Duque in Colombia is because the United States envisions using Colombia to help overthrow Maduro. So it's all that I hate this word, but it fits, geopolitics of the region. And if you're with us, if you're following the US agenda, doesn't matter how brutal you are, you're following the US agenda. If you're
Hmm.
not with us, like Noriega, remember him, followed the United States agenda, then he split. That's it. Goodbye. Um, this is not my vision of a peaceful and sustainable world. And I don't know, yesterday I was at a pro-Palestinian rally in Parsippany, and I mention it because usually I get invited to events like this as an activist. I've been a peace activist uh, officially for 20 years, but a peace activist for longer. And I'm not able to say I'm Madelyn Hoffman running for governor of New Jersey with the Green Party of New Jersey. But this time I was invited by a group um, who was the organizers were 16, and were advised by some adults, and they said, what about having some politicians at this rally? And the one adult whom I know very well, she said, there's only one politician that I would trust at the microphone, and she meant me. And so I got an invitation to speak as a candidate for governor as the Green Party of New Jersey. And I was standing on a bench giving the speech, reading it off my phone because my printer doesn't work. And I had people, somebody holding the mic, somebody starting chants. It was one of the most exhilarating experiences I've ever had, as combining activism and electoral politics together. And this is why I do this. That was one of the reasons that I got into doing this, um, running for office. I mean, as a Green, because I feel that it enhances, strengthens my activism. And you mentioned at the beginning of the show this whole idea that you know, the Greens are, that you say you don't agree with, thankfully, um, that the Greens are out there taking votes away from this one
Oh,
and that one.
yes, I want to talk
Yes.
about that. A lot of people talk
Uh,
about the splitting of the vote because we live in this
yes.
bipartisan, even though realistic, like, there's a reason that you were the only person trusted in that speech, and that's because generally speaking, Republicans and Democrats are really the same, especially when it comes to foreign policy, more or
Yes.
less. I mean, Biden still has detention centers in Texas where people are dying and in cages. Um, we're still at war with like 7 different countries. We're still supporting genocides and apartheids. Not much has changed from Trump to
No.
Biden, other
No.
than Biden's more presentable than Trump. And this is in no way me supporting anybody. I think they're both not very
Yes.
good, to
Yes.
speak lightly. But so let's talk a little bit about that because a lot of people voted for Biden. And let me just say
Yes.
first, people, it's difficult to keep up with politics, especially in America where all politicians are lying and even the news media is misrepresenting information. And it's so easy for a person to fall into that ideology of this side is Republicans are good because they lower taxes, or Democrats are good because they are more lenient towards immigration, but because that's what they say on TV. But when you
Yes.
look at the policies, none of that's true. And it's easy for them to get into this line of thinking of, well, I don't want to ruin a chance for the good guys,
That's
whoever
right.
side that is, by splitting the vote by voting for a third party candidate. And I think that's nonsense. Um, but what do you think about it?
Well, as somebody who's been following this and voting independent not since I was old enough to vote. I voted for Jimmy Carter in 1976.
Well,
Um,
he was a step away from most Democrats at the time. He was a special candidate when
he
he
was
ran.
portrayed that way. He was portrayed that way. I later found out that he wasn't, and now as an ex-president, he certainly isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is rather a different kind of person, different kind of human being than most of our many of our presidents. But um, if we equate change with voting in Democrats and then voting in Republicans, and then voting in Democrats, and then maybe another Democrat, and then a couple terms of Republicans back and forth. I wrote about this and I called it ping pong politics. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. What
Yep.
happens is the players are the same, the table is the same, and the table just keeps moving further and further and further to the right. And one day it's going to fall right over, right off the cliff. Um, and so I don't equate change, and I don't equate, um, I can't even use the word progressive anymore without thinking of 100 reasons not to use it.
Mm.
But I think of policies, I think of the need for peace. I think of the need to stop climate change. I think of, the things that we need out there. And I think of all the people who were out in front of the detention centers and calling for the abolition of ICE. I think of all the people who are calling for defunding the police because of the impact that policing has had on their communities. I think of all the people like now who are out in the streets saying free Palestine, put an end to the Israeli occupation of Palestine. All the people in the streets of Colombia and here, in solidarity with the people of Colombia who are getting shot at in the streets. And I think of running for office as a way of amplifying those people or those struggles, those movements, those people who are out in the streets trying to change something. And as those movements grow and as the Green Party grows, and representing those, or being standing side by side, not even representing, just being a part of that movement ourselves, then that's how change is going to happen. In addition, we push for ranked choice voting in this in New Jersey and
Right.
throughout the country, but I'm based here in New Jersey. where you could go into the voting booth, if we had it, and rank your top 3 choices. So you would say, my first choice is Madelyn Hoffman, Green Party of New Jersey. My second choice is blah, blah, blah. If you do ranked choice voting, if your choice doesn't get 50% or more of the votes in that election, then whomever you voted for as a second place choice, those votes get applied to them. Okay, so if it just, for example, if it's Murphy and I'm not sure who the Republican is going to be, but if it's me, it was me and Murphy and a Republican, and you were afraid to vote for Murphy, for me rather, because you didn't want to see the Republican beat Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you could vote for me first and Murphy second, if I didn't get enough votes to win, all of your votes for Murphy would be applied to him and he could win. Or whoever was the first to 50% of the vote would win. So this is the kind of change I believe we need to get out of that framework, is when you're standing in the voting booth and you're saying, who do I vote for? I don't like this person. I don't like that person. I really like her. I really like the Green Party candidate for president. But I am so scared that, I mean, this was so loud in the 2020 election. It was deafeningly loud.
Mm-hmm.
If I vote green, then we might have Trump left still standing. And I don't, any blue will do. We just got to get rid of Trump. Well, now the debates are about what the legacy of Trump was, not about the policies that Biden is promoting or not promoting, because it's all about Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. So
Even if the
I think
policies are the same.
and especially on international relations, you're right. And if they're not the same now, Joe Biden's talking about going back to the Iran deal that was put in place under Obama. But the Iran deal under Obama had a lot of, I supported it and I worked like heck to get it. And I lobbied Menendez and Booker to support it when I was the director of a peace organization. But the way people were looking at that was not for peace, not the way I looked at it. It was a whole different framework. So yeah, we should be part of a global moratorium on sanctions as a country. We should be part of a global moratorium on war, especially when countries are still fighting to control the pandemic. But people criticize me for this is a debate I was having this morning on Facebook. You're so pure. You're so, you want to be a big fish in a little pond, and you're so pure. You're the reason that the country is going to wherever it's going. I don't think of it that way. I think of, I still am an idealist. I still have a vision. I still have a hope that things can be a lot better than they are. And I'm not going to settle. I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden when I fought all my life against war, and he supports
I've supported
them.
it for 50 years.
Yeah, right. How do you rationalize? He's not Trump. I'm sorry. How low do you go? How far down can we go? What, if we had Trump, but he had a D in front of his name, would you still vote? Because any blue
Right.
will do. We have to
Right.
get out of this box that we're in with politics. We have to reactivate the critical thinking part of our brain so that we can look at policies and vote policies, not party, so we can move move to where we need to be.
And also, the whole argument, people will try to pin losses on third parties all the time. This happened in 2016. Hillary Clinton tried to blame her loss to Trump on the Green Party of Pennsylvania because Trump won Pennsylvania. And as you know, Pennsylvania is a huge swing state. Usually, the person who wins that state wins the election for the past 120 years or so. And Jill Stein, so Clinton lost by, I forget the exact number, maybe it was 20,000 or 30,000. Jill Stein, the Green candidate, won about 50,000 of the votes. So Hillary Clinton made the argument, well, if she hadn't have been on the ballot, we would have gotten those 50,000 votes and we would have won. But they ignore that Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, had 150,000 votes, and most of those people would have been, libertarians aren't necessarily conservative, but they tend to lean a little more right.
Yeah, a little
They
bit.
probably would have voted for Trump, and that was triple the margin of the Jill Stein vote. So the argument is just invalid because you can't just subtract and add numbers and point to the sum and say that's the number that we needed and that's the reason we didn't win. And also, most Americans don't vote, and it's not because they're apolitical. It's not because they don't care what's going on. It's usually because they look at the two candidates that are available to them and they say, I don't like either of them. I'm not going to vote. My voice isn't heard anyway. What I want isn't being
Right.
fought for. What I believe in isn't being fought for. I don't have a voice here. Why would I vote for someone that doesn't represent me? So people talk about splitting the vote, but third-party candidates getting a bigger platform only adds the amount of people voting in total, I think.
No, I agree with you 3,000%. You're absolutely right. You have more voices out there. People have more to choose from. But then also our winner take all system. I mean, if you look at whoever wins the popular vote wins all the electoral votes. So if it were 51-49%, Democrats 51%, Republicans 49%, or flipped, all the power would go to the Republican. All the electoral votes would go to the Republican or whomever was the winner. And so that's another reason why people stay home. They say, well, this is primarily a blue state or this is primarily a red state. My voice isn't going to matter because even if we got close, all the electoral votes will go to the eventual winner. But honestly, I mean, we're in the process of getting signatures on our petition, my ballot access petition. We've reached the minimum. We've gone past the minimum. We're still collecting signatures until June 6th. And we talked to many, many people to get every one of those signatures because we've gotten some electronically, but the vast majority have been paper petitions. And so many people are saying, well, I'm not sure if I would vote green, but I know we need more choices.
Absolutely.
Give it a go. I want you to be on the ballot. I want more. I think we need more options. And recent polls are showing that somewhere between 60 and 65% of those polls are saying that we need a strong third party, at least one third party.
At least, yeah. I think people who support the idea of having a Green Party also support the idea of having a Libertarian Party and just the idea of having more than these two nonsense parties.
Well, and we
Republicans
argued,
and Democrats. I mean,
okay, yeah. Thank you for specifying. We argued last year. There was two independent candidates for U.S. Senate, in addition to me running against Senator Cory Booker as a Green. I was running as a Green against Booker. We argued for weeks that there should be a debate. And we argued for weeks that the debate should include all ballot qualified candidates. If we got enough signatures to be on the ballot, we should be included in the debates. Nope.
And why was that?
It's a good question because we even appealed to the New Jersey Globe. One of the editors there, his name is David Wildstein, and the New Jersey Globe was having congressional debates. They were not televising them. They were live streaming them on the internet. And we went to him and we asked if we could be included in a debate of all independent candidates and all candidates for U.S. Senate. And he said, no, we don't have the resources for that. He said, we could give you a special conversation, you being the independents, but we'll have to wait and see. We'll come back to you in a couple of weeks. They also said they weren't going to do a debate at all for U.S. Senate. Cory Booker, basically, the media in this state rolled over for Cory Booker and kind of anointed him, crowned him as King Cory, U.S.
Yeah.
Senator, and didn't want to have other choices out there. Now, the media and the political machines are tied together. And someone told me that a media person said, if you interview the wrong person, you're kept out of that media.
Blacklisted.
Yeah, the media political machine, and you don't want that, do you? Um, so to make a long story short, New Jersey Globe did have a debate between Mehta and Booker about 5 days before Election Day. They never invited us. They never had a special conversation with us independents. We had our own discussion and debate that my running mate, Heather Warburton, produced for us. And, I was lied to my face, saying that we would do that. And he knew what we wanted because my Veronica Fernandez, the other independent for U.S. Senate, another of the two independents, we organized a petition campaign. We had hundreds of signatures on a petition campaign for there to be a debate amongst all ballot qualified candidates.
Which doesn't seem, in a democracy, that sounds like it's exactly how it should work. But yeah. New Jersey does have a history of being a very corrupt state, financially, politically, and it goes back to the very beginning. Really, New Jersey and New York have always been some of the most corrupt states. How obvious is corruption between media and politics and business in our state specifically? Because we know it exists on a national level, but in just this small microcosm of New Jersey, how obvious is it? How potent is the corruption here?
Well, I ran for governor in 1997, and I didn't see it, but I think I was politically naive. I ran for U.S. Senate in 2018 and 2020, and I encountered some of it, around Senator Menendez. There was a lot.
Yes. He's still battling charges of corruption.
Yes. And the woman who ran in the primary against him, who did very well, surprisingly well, she was tossed off the ballot this time. She was running for governor, and she submitted signatures on petitions to get on the ballot. And she submitted 1,900. You need 800 minimum. She submitted 1,900 signatures. Should have been fine, except for the fact that 1,600 of the 1,900 were of signatures whose last names began with an A or a B. Yeah, I mean, you can't, statistically, that's virtually impossible to collect signatures on the street or electronically and have, what is that, like three-fourths of the names come in with last name that begins with an A or a B. There was something else going on. So she was thrown off the ballot. And then, as I said, I encountered David Wildstein and the Jersey Globe and that tight connection face to face last year. It was, you'd think that I'd be aware of it and I'd know of it. I've been around for a few years now, dealing with the political system in New Jersey, but it really hit me hard across the face. And so now I'll tell you, you'll have to have me back on in September or October to answer that question, because running for governor as opposed to U.S. Senate, I'm going to be right smack in the middle of it, right smack in the middle of New Jersey corruption. And I made a pledge, a vow to myself and to other Greens, I'm not going to be shy about talking about it. As you can see, I just I named a person.
Yes,
and named
that was
a situation.
Very bold.
I'm going to be doing that because in order to address the problem, the light's got to be shining on the problem. And so I suspect, I already know that that he was not happy with what I did, calling him out last year. He's already shown that in stories he's written about my campaign.
Hmm.
And he's not going to be the only one. I'm anticipating pushback from the machine. And my eyes are wide open this time. So I'll be able to answer your question much more fully and with concrete information come September or October.
Absolutely, and I look forward to talking with you again. Um, I think that just about does it. We've covered pretty much everything. Why don't you tell the people where they can find you, where they can find your information? I know you're very active. You've been a political activist, so I know you're on the street a lot, at protests, at engagements, and just talking to the people face to face. So you can tell them where to find your schedule
Sure.
and where to find your social media and all that good stuff.
Sure, thank you. I'm Hoffman for the People on Instagram. And I'm going to be doing an Instagram Live tomorrow, Tuesday at 8 o'clock. I have a website, Hoffman for Gov, New Jersey. That's Hoffman for FOR Gov, GOVNJ.com. I have an email address, hoffmanforgovernor2021 @gmail.com. I have a Facebook page, Hoffman for Governor 2021. If you want to find out about the schedule, you can email me. You can go on the website. We also, on the website, there's a volunteer form so that I have a group of 20 to 25 interns and volunteers, mostly college and high school, because I really believe in empowering youth, because that's where the change is coming. People say, the youth are our future. I say no, they're our present. Because there are a lot of young people on the streets. Like I said, that pro-Palestinian solidarity rally organized by 16-year-olds. And just as I'll throw it in, I believe that we should change the voting age to 16, lower it to 16. I think will make for a much more involved, informed, and engaged population. But anyhow, those are ways you can reach me. If you want to sign my petition electronically, you can go to bit.ly, that bit.ly/Hoffman, capital H, HOFFMAN, petition, capital P, and the word petition to follow. We are pushing hard to get more than enough signatures to withstand a challenge. We have to submit our petitions on June 7th. With the fact that this one person's petitions were discarded because of potential fraud, we think that the antennas are going to be up, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure our signatures withstand challenge. So,
all right. Well, good luck. The election's coming up in the fall.
yes.
So everybody who's listening to this, get educated on all of your candidates. Thank you for listening. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Daniel.